hello. Thank you so much for coming to what is actually only the second ever House Summer School webinar. It's a new thing for us, so we hope you find it useful. Please do let us know. You can drop us a line or send us a message in the chat function, bottom right of your screen. Hopefully you should see that, which you can actually test right now by firing over where you're dialing in from today. It would be good for us to know, to find out a little bit about you. We're going to ask you some more about yourselves in a minute, but start off by just sending in something on the chat about where you are from. And while you're doing that, I'll carry on. Obviously, the topic today is how to renovate sustainably. And I'm Kate Burt. I'm a writer and editor here at House, which means I'm one of the team putting together all that good stuff that you get in your weekly newsletters from us, the house tours, the how-to stories, and increasingly stories about sustainability in design and architecture, which means we've gathered some knowledge and a few experts along the way, one of whom you will meet shortly. And in the Q&A session today, we're going to outline some of the ways in which you can overcome challenges that are thrown up when you want a project to be sustainable, as well as discussing lots of ideas for creating more environmentally friendly homes. To guide us, inform us, and inspire us all, our guest today is the lovely Kat Hode, who has contributed to many of the sustainability stories we've published on House, which you can find if you go to house.co.uk/ideabooks/sustainability. And don't worry, that will be on the handout, which I will direct you to shortly. And just before we introduce you properly to Kat, hello everyone. Have you found the chat function? Have you been able to share where you're from? We've got someone from Wexford in Ireland. We've got Isabella in Dublin. Hello. We've got Bean Interiors in East Sussex. Anyone else? Don't be shy. Say hi. Don't worry, you can say hi as we go, and we're going to get you to do a poll shortly. But first of all, Kat. Kat is many things, including being the founder and chair of Absolute Project Management. She is also a founding signatory of Interior Design Declares, which, in case you're not familiar, is a sustainability and biodiversity campaigning body. There is also an architecture equivalent called Architecture Declares, and I believe a Construction Declares too. And we're going to kick off in a bit with some audience participation, as I said. But first of all, Kat, tell us a bit more about your sustainability credentials and basically why you're the person we've got doing this Q&A today.
Hi, I'm Kat from Absolute Project Management. My brief history in this area, I set up and ran APM for 15 years. I've just sold it and I remain as chair. I've always been interested in sustainability from a sort of personal perspective. And several years ago, various interior design colleagues from other practices were talking about the need to raise awareness of sustainability in our profession, our industry. So 3.5 years ago, we decided to set up Interior Design Declares, which is, as Kate said, effectively a pledge to work more sustainably, and to raise awareness of the need to do this throughout the industry. It's been very successful. We've incorporated sustainable practices in our studio. Like early on, we put in an air source heat pump and PVs, and then as the industry has changed, which we'll come to talk about, we've been able to do that more and more. I've also just completed a course at Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership in Sustainability in Real Estate, which I'd really recommend, and was super useful and like totally built on all the knowledge I had and broadened it. Kate and I have collaborated over the years on articles, so I was very pleased to join her for this seminar.
And it's very nice to have you as well. So what we're going to do now, we're going to do a couple of polls. The first one is to find out a little bit more about you. So let me just see if I can remember how to launch the poll. Yes, here we go. What is your role? So this should appear on your screen now. And it's basically just asking to type in your profession. So if you could just take a moment and do that now, hit the relevant option, that would be super helpful. Just seeing if I can get that and actually see the results myself, which would be helpful. Looks like we've got, yep, it's architecture heavy, followed closely by interior design. Let me just see, I'm not sure if I'm sharing that on screen. Let me just check. I want you all to see. Probably it's more important for you to be able to see the next one, which we will do now, which is what single thing would make it easier for your business to work more sustainably. I'm going to start that, launch that now. Okay, sorry. Okay, right. So hopefully I am now seeing what you're seeing, which is the responses to the challenges to working more sustainably. So looks like, and that's interesting. Can you see this, Kat?
Yeah, I can.
Great. Just checking I've got the tech working. So client enthusiasm is way ahead, followed neck and neck by affordability for the client and needing more knowledge about methods and materials. So you're in the right place, everyone. That's Definitely. Good. And 14% other. So whatever those things are, we would love to know. And we're going to have a session at the end where you can ask questions. So hold on to those thoughts. And yeah. What's that surprise to you, Kat? That client enthusiasm is a sort of major challenge?
Kind of, yes. And I assume that's combined with clients' enthusiasm for what they think is spending more money on projects done in a sustainable way. Yeah, and it's a bit depressing, but on the other hand, things are changing really quickly since, as I say, 3.5 years ago when we set up Interior Design Declares. It was really quite difficult to even start those conversations without looking like a real sort of goody person who was going to be promoting like raffia for everything. That's really changed. And I think because there's so much reporting in the media and everywhere about the real impact of climate change and the need to engage with that, nearly everybody who works will be having to tackle that within their day job. And so hopefully bringing it up in relation to their home renovation isn't going to be such a stretch as it was before.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I mean, how does it sort of reflect the industry generally? Sort of where are we in the industry? How are we doing in relation to sustainability, sort of on the professional side, do you think?
I think on the professional side, we're doing well. As I said, when we started trying to introduce the idea to clients years ago, it was not easy to do, but that's really changed. And as I say, almost every business that you're in has to think about that. So clients will, as I say, be already thinking about those sorts of things. I also think that regulation, which they will have seen in their professional lives, that is affecting all industries about carbon reporting and so on, that is going to come in the residential sector as well. Possibly not quickly, but by all sorts of different means, like EPCs and building regs constantly upgrading what you need to do in terms of insulation and energy efficiency and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it has been really encouraging to see that this being generally picked up and thought about by all sorts of industries. And I really hope that with the tips that we give you today, it'll be easier to push that door that's a little bit open.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm sure. I know you've got some really useful tips and some first-hand knowledge, and we'll come back to some of the things you've touched on in that question. But what would you say is like a good starting point for people who want to work more sustainably, but are coming up against these barriers and challenges?
I think the key thing to do, which is not very exciting but is really useful, is to plan ahead, to think right at the start of the project about how you're going to do it more sustainably. I would say the areas that I think are really important to focus on are energy, so use energy more efficiently, use renewable energy if you can, waste, as in how to reduce the amount of waste, and particularly the amount of waste that's going to landfill. Materials, how to use materials made from sustainable resources and to reduce carbon intensive, materials that are made or installed in a carbon intensive way. And also design for longevity and reuse. The last one, which is nice, I think, is biodiversity, and you can think about that even if it's on a tiny scale. But I suppose the final thing I was going to, I think is really important to bear in mind, is this all sounds quite terrifying, especially if you haven't thought about it. But essentially, if you do one thing more sustainably on your next project, you're already making a difference. So you absolutely don't have to do everything all at once, because that's completely overwhelming and fairly impossible. If you do one thing, possibly from what we talked about per project, then that's great.
Yeah, and know that counts, and know that matters. Yeah. Know that the whole, many small things make a whole.
Yeah, and I also think just raising these things with clients helps awareness, and sometimes clients who you don't think are going to be into it surprise you by actually being quite interested.
That's good to hear. Yeah, so just having the conversations, and as you were saying, it can seem a bit overwhelming, even though this is something I write about a lot. I heard all of that and I was thinking, wow, yeah, I feel I wouldn't really know where to start. So I think if we could break those down, and I'll sort of go through them one by one, the points that you raised. So I think let's start with demolition. So I'm picturing like a fictional Victorian terrace, leafy suburb, and the owners want to do a rear extension. That is definitely a project that we see a lot on House, and I'm sure it's a really familiar project to a lot of the people attending today. But so this involves demolition, right?
Yeah.
Does it have to involve demolition? Is there anything wrong with demolition? Is this something we need to sort of change our mindset on? Is this somewhere where you can make a difference as a designer or an architect?
I think it's somewhere you can make a really big difference. Demolition, I mean, we haven't really thought about that at all. Actually, this is one of the things that's just coming through on how to do things sustainably. But the
demolition, basically, that there's an issue with embodied carbon, isn't there?
Exactly. Yeah, there's loads of you demolish stuff. The embodied carbon that's in whatever you're demolishing is wasted. So the way to from my point of view, the ways that you can reduce that is to work out right at the start, so a bit of planning, what is going to be stripped out and how it can be reused or recycled to avoid it going to landfill. You can sort the materials that come out into different, you can get the contractor to have it as a line in the specification that demolition waste has to be sorted into different materials that can be taken away by specialist demolition waste collectors. one of the other things you can do, which is a bit more big picture, but is talk to the clients about whether they need to do everything that they are doing. So, for example, everybody wants to, well, not everybody, but loads of people want to put a rear extension on their house. We were talking to one client, and she had a massive house and she wanted to have a massive kitchen. And we said, you could do that, but it's going to cost loads of money to extend for various reasons, particularly structural and party wall. We think what you should do is renovate the ground floor of your house to make a big kitchen in the space you've got at the moment. Then you retain space in your garden. You've got loads of space elsewhere in the house, and it will cost loads less. So you've got 150k, whatever that you'd spend on the extension, you've got that to spend on an even nicer kitchen. Having said that, you could also do things like repair, redecorate, reuse aspects of the property. In fact, I had a new kitchen a few years ago, and I put it on free cycle, and somebody came and took it away. And then afterwards, he sent me photos of it that he'd installed in his sister's house. And I felt really ashamed, actually, that I hadn't thought of reusing this perfectly okay kitchen in a different way.
And so, he made it look stunning.
Basically, he was free plus his labour. And I didn't do that. So,
oh, that's a good cautionary tale. And I think, there are lots of things that we're all learning all the time, and things that are kind of obvious, but they're only obvious maybe when you don't do them or when you see someone else do them. And I think, what you were saying about the cost is such a good way to sell the idea of potentially not demolishing to a client, because then they've got that extra money to spend on the finishing, which generally I assume is going to be where the clients kind of, they've got the end.
That's what they're excited about.
Yeah. And so it's quite an easy sell to get them more excited about having more money to spend on that. And also, I guess, not demolishing. Even if you do extend, something we've seen a lot of in some of the projects that are being uploaded on House at the moment are people are extending, but they're retaining that structure of the back wall. They're maybe just taking out a sort of doorway and making it an open thing. So you've kind of got a broken plan space that retains the original rear wall. So things like that are also, there's lots of ideas. Obviously, there's lots of ideas on House that you can easily browse through. There's so many pictures, which, yes, makes my job sort of joyful and also gives me permanent house envy. So, but they're a good resource. And as next on from the list that you ran through at the top, sort of, I guess some of the fundamental changes that are probably really boring to clients, kind of the infrastructure of their house, energy efficiency, that kind of thing. What would you say? How can you kind of get in there and make those attractive to a client and sort of work them out within the budget?
Those are very good questions, but looking at it from, again, sort of thinking about it right at the start is a really good thing to do. And if you can speak to clients about about energy efficiency, like about insulating, or about using, if they're replacing their boiler, for example, you could talk to them about using renewable energy like air source heat pumps and solar panels. Air source heat pumps are expensive, but they are coming down in price all the time and are being much more talked about, and basically are becoming a thing that is something that you might use rather than you might use if you've got 25 grand spare and want to be nice to the environment, kind of thing. But there are also other ways of much smaller ways of helping to save energy. For example, as I said, insulating, like anywhere you're doing up, even if it's just a room, you could look at the options to insulate the walls, and you've got to think about the space there, but particularly if you use a sustainable sort of insulation. But it might be possible if you're doing a new floor, if you're stripping out the old floor, then put more insulation beneath the floorboards, and that will make a big difference. But then also things like you can get, and they're not particularly cheap, but they're not mad, wastewater heat recovery, for example, from your shower. When you have a shower, obviously the hot water just goes down the drain and out into the sewers, but you can get devices that capture some of that energy, some of the heat, and put it back into your immersion heater, for example. And so it saves money in the long term, and it also saves a lot of energy and reduces how much carbon is your house is producing. There are also heat exchangers you can put on anything that removes air from this house, like you can get heat exchangers on ventilation systems. So if you put a bathroom vent in, you can have that with a heat exchange function. Also,
I was just going to say that is quite a good, if someone really can't stretch to a heat pump, which obviously we might come back to EPC ratings in a minute, but if they can't stretch to that, then that is quite a significant. That's going to really help to keep their home warm. Is that right? And filter the air. Is that how it works?
Well, to a certain extent, but also it will, in the long term, it will reduce their bills because they're not using more energy to heat, because they're capturing some of the energy that they've already used to heat to keep it warm. And there are definitely pros and cons about all these things, and some of them are arguably not that expensive and not that cheap, not that cost effective, and also don't capture that much of the heat. But again, it's worth looking into. Each house is different, and again, if you can make a small difference, it's better than making no difference at all.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, hobs is something that we talked about when we were discussing this, that just automatically aiming to put in an induction and sort of dissuading people from reusing or installing gas, because
that's right. And particularly if you can persuade your clients to use green electricity suppliers, because electricity is always going to be more sustainable than natural gas, i.e. from fossil fuel.
Yeah, and we've been seeing some very nice white induction hobs on house in the last few weeks. A couple of them have popped up in our tours, so there's that to get excited about on the client side, and also for them to sell their house, if money is an issue, I guess. If you're thinking about selling your house in the future, if you get a higher EPC rating by having done some of these things, your house is going to be more valuable, I guess.
I think that's right, and I think that's going to be, to a certain extent, that's the case already. But I think that's absolutely going to be coming in, and I think there's probably going to be regulation about that. Definitely, you could, if you have a higher EPC, for example, on a rental property, you can get more rent, and in some circumstances, if you don't have an adequate EPC rating, it's not actually very easy to rent it out at all. I also expect to see on the sort of on the positive side from that, I expect to see a lot more availability of all these things, and hopefully financial support for people that are renovating their own homes, such as grants or tax benefits like zero rated VAT on air source heat pumps themselves, or the labour involved to install them, which is significant.
Yeah, that would make a huge difference. And so you also mentioned sustainable materials, which obviously, if you're aiming for a sustainable renovation, it's going to be a goal, but it might not always be easy. They might be new to you or to your clients. So what are some easy wins there with sustainable materials?
I think essentially think about using materials that are natural and renewable in a very broad sense. So, for example, if you use timber, that's generally speaking, if it's come from a decently managed forest, that is both sustainable and renewable, because, well, it's obviously renewable because they regrow, and it's sustainable because it breaks down into, it is biodegradable over some time. You can look at using recycled plastics, which again is a little bit controversial. Some people don't think you should use those at all, but I think if it already exists, you might as well recycle and use it. So, for example, in fabrics, there's really good quality recycled polyester, for example, that you can have for blinds or sofa coverings and that kind of stuff. Wool is a good one to use. Linen is a good material to use. not least because it uses far less water. So if you're thinking about climate change generally, that's a really good option. Organic cotton, ideally. Then other things like you can look at, which is a bit more complicated and a bit more in the sort of the structure of the thing. Hempcrete, for example. Alternatives to plaster, like a lime-based plaster, which you have to again think about carefully, but that's an option. And you could also inquire with your structural engineer, architect, contractor about options for using, for example, lower carbon steel, greener concrete, etc.
So that's interesting that those are coming into sort of mainstream use.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we didn't mention earlier on in terms of how to sell them to your clients, some clients will be persuaded by the kind of environmental benefits and their being good person, but some clients, particularly anecdotally, some very rich people don't necessarily aren't that bothered about the being worthy, but they are really bothered about health. So if you say these things are going to be off-gassing far less than everything being made from plastic or plastic derived materials, then that's a really easy way of saying this is a lovely material. It's not going to, you're not going to be breathing in horrible things when you're lying in bed or whatever.
Yeah,
there's loads more to say on that subject, but
yeah, and I should also add, wealthy environmentalists also are out there. So
no, I'm just talking about one. There's one particular person who I work with a lot, and he's discovered that they have in for a particularly rich and not particularly bothered client was to say, actually, this is much better for your health, and that worked.
Yeah, no, good. And yeah, I was just gonna, thinking about this. I think we know the names of a lot of these materials, and I think it's only when you really know, you fully understand sort of the impact of the alternatives that you sort of have to be on board with it yourself. And I've written a couple of pieces that would probably be useful for people to check out on the handouts. One was actually about vegan interiors, which obviously there's a huge crossover with sustainability. And one of the interviewees for that was extremely knowledgeable also about materials. And in that piece goes into even more detail. So if you're interested in finding out, why linen is kind of a super sustainable material and, interesting ideas for insulation, do check that out. And also Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah, she's another real mover in interior design, declares.
Yeah, I've forgotten her surname, Chloe Bullock, isn't it? Yeah, check out Chloe Bullock. And she's written a book that is basically an incredible handbook for sustainable design. And I also came across, for another piece on reuse in architecture, this incredible company down in Sussex who they used to be sustainable builders, and they now run a builder's merchant that basically sells only sustainable materials. But because they've recognized there's an issue with people being a bit like, oh, I don't really know what this is or what to do with it, they run workshops to train people how to use them. So check them out. They're called, I think they're called Kind Supply, but I'm sure if you Google Sustainable Builders Merchant East Sussex, you'll find them. And we will also come back to the resources section of Interior Design Declares, which is also on the handout, which has epic amounts of resource for you. I'm aware that we are half an hour in and we've still got quite a lot to go through. So let's get on to the next thing, which is sort of reusing and avoiding the skip, which I think we've talked about quite a bit, but is there anything you wanted to add about that? I think you were going to talk about free cycle, which you've covered.
Yeah, I mentioned it, but I could say a lot more. I mean, free cycle, if you don't know about it, essentially is like an eBay, but you don't get any money for your product or whatever you're giving away, but the person who wants it comes to your property and collects it. And we've used that extensively over projects and had obvious things like furniture free cycled, like you put on a bed, you put double bed and mattress, and you know, you don't think anyone would want that, but those people want it. But you can put things like old, really fairly unattractive old light fittings, door handles, taps that you've taken out of a bathroom. You can put them on and they all go. In my experience, I mean, we're in central London, so there's lots of people who need stuff, but wherever you are, it's a really good way of using. It's a really good way of getting people to take stuff away, which then you'd have to put in the skip, you'd have to pay for the skip. And also it's all being reused rather than just chucked.
Yes. And also there are other ways. There are quite a few people on House who are doing interesting things. In fact, the people in East Sussex that I mentioned earlier are on House. So that is probably an easy way to find them. I think you will find them under Kind Construction. So look up their profile on House. And we also have a couple of people on House who will buy your old kitchen, because old kitchens. So if you're taking a beautiful kitchen out of a house that is perfectly reusable, look at selling it, because again, that's something that the clients will it's a good sell for them, isn't it? And
you can save, sorry to interrupt, but you can help clients save money by, for example, saying this sofa which you don't like anymore, could we recover it? Keep the sofa, it doesn't go to landfill, you save lots of money because it's not nearly as expensive as buying a new one, and then you have that money to spend on something else.
Exactly, yeah. And you get a sofa with a story and some potentially much more expensive fabric than you might have been able to afford.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got to choose. Yeah.
And the final thing we wanted to talk about that you raised in your introduction was biodiversity, which I know we don't have any landscapers on here, but it's something that might sort of come into your project, even if you're only doing the building. But how have you sort of found ways to improve biodiversity in projects, and what would you advise people to do?
As I've said elsewhere, I think ahead, so build that in from the outset, and also don't think that anything you do is too small. So you can, if you've got a bigger scale project, you could suggest a green or a brown roof on an extension, which is going to increase biodiversity a lot. It also helps to reduce water runoff and helps with heat retention, or basically it's an insulator. But then if you're looking at gardens, I'd say try and persuade clients to not have just flat paving, but have channels in whatever they have, or basically access to the actual ground, so that rainwater can run off into the ground and be taken away in the normal way, rather than all having to go through the sewer system. If you've got a balcony or a window box, or even like a tiny garden, you can put pots outside and have, for example, grow herbs, vegetables, all of which are or flowers, all of which are like really fun to grow and are good for biodiversity, because you just see, if you've got a pot outside, you see bees and flies and that kind of stuff coming around. So yeah, think about it from the start, and just even tiny things will help.
Yeah, and I think there's also some things that aren't necessarily that mainstream or that obvious. Again, in another piece I wrote that I can't remember, that may have been one that you also contributed to, Kat, because we're constantly asking for your expertise on these pieces. But I interviewed some garden designers who are on House, who I discovered were big fans of wild gardening and brownfield gardening, and or garden design, I should say. And one of the things they talked about was they'd sort of been inspired by the grass verges when driving along motorways, and had realised that those grass verges were sort of not made out of, they weren't kind of fertilised, they didn't have topsoil, they had not been watered regularly, they were probably just building rubble from building the motorway, and yet they were lush and full of bees and flowers and beautiful to look at. And so they like to take, if there's a construction project going on a house, they like to take the the rubble that's been created from any demolition or removals and sort it, crush it into different sizes and build that into the beautiful sort of drought tolerant as well garden design that needs virtually no maintenance and can look beautiful. It's quite a shift, and it's quite a controversial subject because not all garden designers like to think of gardens in that way, but it's definitely something that, you know, there are ideas from it that could be incorporated that are really interesting. And again, that piece is on the handouts, so you can find their house profile on there and check out their ideas and read the piece.
And I also think, like, for example, Chelsea Flower Show this year was full of gardens along the lines you're talking about, so that are natural, like indigenous species, and don't need loads of watering and don't need loads of care, but it looks amazing.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, we did a tour of one that was it was drought tolerant and water preserving. It was anyway, there's a story about it. I can't quite remember the name of it, but it was very clever, and it was all done within the plot of a kind of classic city house with a not very big garden, but it had this pool in the middle, it had water tanks, reclaimed water tanks. Anyway, check it out. And what are we going to talk about next? I think probably we've got to 35 minutes. We might want to be thinking about asking if anyone's got any questions, but should we have a little summary first? So Kat, do you want to just remind us what the key points to think about are, and also tell us where to find the how interior design declares as well, can kind of with the resources section.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've probably bored on about, plan ahead, and even if you do a tiny thing, it makes a difference, and it will encourage you to do more and better in the next project. And then the areas I think to focus on are energy, waste, materials, designing for longevity and reuse, which is actually where you can put some real design, slightly kind of left field design ideas into practice, and also biodiversity.
Great, thank you.
And Interior Design Declares is a good website to look at. Please all join if you can. And it has an amazing and extensive resources page at interiordesignedeclares.co.uk. Then go to the resources page.
Yeah, it's on the handout. Yeah. It's on the handouts. So I think, it's going to be over to you. Hopefully, if you have any questions, if you can't think of any right now, feel free to drop us a line, and definitely check out our sustainability tab on House Stories. So if you go to the House homepage, you will see there's a stories section in the bar at the top, and if you look on that, on the drop down from there, you will see there's a sustainability tab, or you can go to house.co.uk/ideabooks/sustainability. And does anyone have anything they're dying to ask us, or dying to ask Kat? Really, she's the expert. I'm just reporting what people tell me and being fascinated by it.
Yeah, but I guess it would be interesting to know any projects that you've worked on where you've been able to introduce